this session, the writer, the editor, how it works, over to Dee McNamer, who is the author of the wonderful and astonishing Red Rover, which has just come out in paperback. Her previous novels are Rima in the Weeds, One Sweet Quarrel, and My Russian. Her stories, her essays, reviews, journalism, you've read it before. You've read it in the New York Times, you've read it in the New Yorker, the Chicago Tribune, the Miami Herald, Outside Magazine. Keep an eye on all those publications and others for more from Dee. Dee is also a professor here at the University of Montana, the Creative Writing Program, and she is going to introduce our New Yorkers this morning.
Thank you. This is a real pleasure for me because I have on my left one of my star students, and I have on my right a new friend from the summer. Steve and Katie Finch got married this summer in Michigan, and Cindy Spiegel was there, and we had a chance to get to know each other. I'm just going to give you just a brief little background about each of them, and then pose a couple of questions, and I hope that the audience will really plug in with all your questions. I see some of my students here. This is your chance. Okay, Steve Rinella grew up in Michigan. I think he went to about 9 undergraduate schools before he got to Missoula. And we got this application for the MFA program in the 90s, the late 90s, and immediately recognized that this was somebody who really has a distinct sensibility and just a complete avid curiosity about the details of the world and the world that he's interested in, and also had done a fair amount of traveling, and we just wanted him as a student. We had to help him shape up his writing a little bit, which took about 5 minutes. So he came to the program and graduated with an MFA in the nonfiction in 2000, and meanwhile had been already doing some freelance work for publications like Outside, the New Yorker, and his first book, The Scavenger's Guide to Haute Cuisine, was published in 96. Not 2006. I take some small credit for the idea for that book because I went to a secondhand books, or used book sale in Ithaca, New York, when I was teaching there one term, and found the old Escoffier cookbook, the famous French chef who had these enormously elaborate meals that I knew Steve would be interested in because he's a really good cook, and he is a really good hunter and has a lot of game around. He was always bringing me these sort of little bloody packets of meat from time to time when he was here in school. So anyway, he took that and ran with it and wrote this wonderful, hilarious book about putting together an Escoffier kind of feast. And they all ate in Miles City, where his brother lives, and it was just a really charming and wonderful and completely distinctive book. This December, his book American Buffalo will be published with Spiegel and Grau, Cindy's imprint at Random House, and I've read that as well. It's one not to be missed. It's really, it's natural history, it's other kinds of history, it's a wonderful voice throughout. It's basically the story of going to, getting a tag to hunt buffalo in Alaska and what ensues from that. But what you come away from is just this whole sense of the place of the buffalo in American life, really, nothing less than that. Cindy Spiegel was the co-editor of the Riverhead imprint at Penguin until about 2005. Cindy, is that right? Yeah, and she and her partner, publishing partner Julie Grau, then moved to Random House, where they continue to have their own imprint and have a very distinct publishing philosophy. As far as I can tell, at least from the website, it's really idealistic. I'm going to let Cindy tell you a little bit about that. It's a brutal, complicated world. We all know publishing is, people move around a lot. It's changing constantly. But I thought that this would be a chance for Cindy to tell you a little bit about it from her perspective, what she's looking for, what's exciting about what she does, when she knows she's got a book that she can really get behind. And then Steve can talk a little bit about what it's like to find a publisher and be published. This is what many of you are interested in. How it all works, what's the best way to proceed. So maybe, Cindy, you could start with just telling us how you got into the business, how you got interested in it, what it means to you, what keeps you fueled.
So I always knew that I wanted to do something. Can you hear me? Is this on? I always knew that I wanted to do something with writing and literature, and I started after college. I worked at Random House in the college division and really learned everything about the process of publishing a book, the sort of nuts and bolts of production, copy editing, proofreading. It was a real education, but after a while it was kind of boring, and I got really tired of the kind of book, just everything they were all textbooks. And I was also tired of New York, which I had lived in all my life, and decided to go to graduate school. I think I was reading Anna Karenina or something, or A War and Peace at my desk, under my desk, and it was really long, and I couldn't do anything else for a really long time because I had to finish it. And then I decided I'd go to graduate school, and I went to Berkeley to do a PhD program in Comp Lit, doing Russian. I had studied Russian, a lot of Russian, and stayed there for 4 years, and then got sick of Berkeley and missed New York, and didn't want to be an academic, and it was taking 10 years on average for people to get their PhDs, and a good friend of mine who was really, really smart had already left and moved to New York, and I thought, if he could leave, I can leave too. It's like not so shameful. And I went back to New York, and I was 29, and I wanted to find a job in publishing, and everybody told me I was too old, and people laughed at me because they thought I was like overeducated because I had studied Latin, and it was terrible. People made fun of me, and I would go interview with someone who was really young, and they would say, but you have to make coffee, and I'd say, that's fine, I'll make coffee, and they'd say, you wouldn't make coffee, and I finally got a job working. I got a job working for a guy who'd also gotten his PhD, who'd grown up in New York, and at a small house, an imprint of Haute and Mifflin called Tickner and Fields. And I ended up working there for 4 years. And the first book, it was a lot of luck, which it always is, but the first book that I ever acquired was, for $3,000, was Kathleen Norris's Dakota Spiritual Geography. And I had gotten this submission. It was a letter that had been written to the editor who had already left Houghton, who used to edit the Best American Essays, and I had inherited editing the Best American Essays. And this woman, Katrina Kennison, had written Kathleen a letter because Kathleen's piece had been a finalist, and said, do you have a book? And Kathleen had written a letter that had come to me because Katrina wasn't there, and it said, it's 8 years later, I think I have a book. It's called, I have a title. And the title was so great that I knew there was a book. The pieces were all over the place, but we started working together, and that became a bestseller. But I ended up losing my job after the day I came back from maternity leave. They folded Tickner and Fields. I didn't have a job, and I ended up being offered this job to begin a new imprint at what was then Putnam, which was later called Riverhead. And when I decided to go, it didn't even have a name. And Susan Peterson, who's now the president of Penguin, hired 4 of us women to start this new division. And she's a very brilliant publisher. She said what we were going to do was to publish books that were going to change the world, books that were different from other books. And she'd hired us for something she saw in us. I was really afraid to go. In fact, I'd called her to tell her I wasn't coming because I'd also been offered a job at Algonquin, and I was going to take it. And on the phone, she asked me if I was coming, and I just said yes. I couldn't say no to her. that it was a longer story, and I ended up there. But I was afraid that she would want me to publish bestsellers, and I didn't think I knew how to do that, because I really just liked really well-written, good books, and I didn't think they were bestsellers. And what she taught me was that the books that are special and are distinctive can sell. And I ended up having a stream of bestsellers. It was an amazing time. I did The Color of Water, and all of Kathleen came with me. I did all of her books. Shang-Rai Lee's, all of his books. The Beach by all of Alex Garland's books. Harold Bloom came to me, and I published his big Shakespeare book. And it was this amazing time at Riverhead. We started this house, and it grew, and it became really profitable. And we were doing what we loved to do. We were doing books that we loved. And so when Julie and I we became publishers of Riverhead, and 3 years ago we decided to leave. I'm talking too long. And we decided to leave together, and we were offered, we wanted to do the same thing we were doing, but there were, we had grown up at Penguin, and there were certain problems there for us, and we decided, suddenly everybody was offering us a new division at all different houses, and we chose to go to Random House within the Doubleday group because they were offering us the most support. And we launched this new house a year ago. We started publishing, and our first book was Susie Orman's Women and Money, which is not the kind of book we do, but we had published Susie at Riverhead, and she followed us, which is fantastic, and she made us, she sold 1 million copies in her first year. And one of the first books that I acquired was Steve's book. It was really scary because, I published The Kite Runner was another, I'm always forgetting what I did, but when we left, we published Juno Diaz, and when we left, we had to leave ZZ Packer. We had to leave everybody behind. Penguin was really angry at us for leaving. It was very personal because we'd been really close to the publisher. She became the president of Penguin. We became publishers. We were bridesmaids at her wedding. It was very painful to leave, but then when we left, it was difficult on all sides, and they told us we couldn't take any of our authors, which is kind of unusual. Usually they let you take the people you've been working with. So we had to leave everyone behind. Susie hadn't signed her contract yet, which is how she could come. But, and we were scared because we didn't know how we were going to find these new writers. We'd spent 12 years, 13 years developing this list and growing this list of writers, and we didn't know how like Juno's now, he won the Pulitzer for this book that Julie edited, but when we started, he had just she had acquired a collection of stories in a novel. He hadn't, it takes a long time for a writer to really come into their own and grow, and so we didn't know where these new writers were going to come from. We'd done a really good job, and we had to leave them, and maybe one day they'll come after they're done with their contracts, but that was the scary part. And so it was an amazing thing when suddenly, Steve's agent called and told me about this book about the American buffalo, and that was exactly like I had, obviously never published a book about buffaloes before. I don't do a lot of natural history. I'm always looking for books that are different from anything I've done or anything I know that is out there, because that's what really interests me. And like The Kite Runner, when that came out, I had just been reading about the war in Afghanistan. We had just invaded Afghanistan when I got the novel in, and I realized I didn't know anything about Afghanistan, and that the novel opened up that world for me. And I remember when I was publishing it, people at work would say, yeah, but when this novel comes out, we're going to be in Iraq. It's not going to, nobody's going to care about Afghanistan anymore. And that didn't quite seem right to me, that it just seemed really seminal. And everything, the experience of reading, if it does change the way you look at the world, if it opens you up, that's what we're looking for. And that's this book on the buffalo with a great narrative, and this story that, I had no idea that buffalo completely overran this country at one point, and the world was, it's our history, and he's an amazing writer, Steve is, and it was exactly what we wanted. So I knew right away that I wanted to publish him. It's really exciting now. Our first list of books are finally coming out. That was one of the first acquisitions I made at Spiegel and Grau. And those books are finally starting to be published right now, and it's an exciting time. So.
Thank you. one of the books that's coming out is, some of you may know Dan Baum, who lived here. His book, 9 Lives, it's called, right? About New Orleans in the aftermath of Katrina, is coming out in the spring, I think, with Spiegel and Grau. Okay, well, Steve, there are people in the room here, a number of them, I think, who want to know how they can be where you are 6-8 years out of grad school. How did you get where you are?
That's something that I wonder about all the time. I mean, and I don't mean it in a funny way, but I just mean that there's 2 versions of the story, and you always have to imagine when you measure like what is success. For a long time, I wanted my idea of success would be that I would have enough money that I could drink as many drinks at the bar as I wanted to. And it was like I was always like stopping drinking because I didn't have money, and then now I lost a lot of my interest in drinking, but I guess I just wanted to be that. I remember sitting in Dee's office when I was in grad school and telling her that, like, my goal or my dream would be that someone would call me up and say, like, what do you think about this subject? Would you find out about this subject and write something about it? And it seemed just very unattainable, and it seemed like the greatest thing. And now I do that, and I also can present to people subjects that maybe they might want me to go find out about. And there's 2 ways in which that happened. I could say that one way was that I went to graduate school, and I read all the books that people read, and I met writers, and I found out what goes through their head, and I found a way to have like a little bit of faith in my opinion about things, or have a little bit of faith that I had something to say, and worked hard, But probably another version of it isn't as cool, and it's just that I met a guy through Dee, largely, a guy named Ian Fraser, and one day he called up a magazine and told the editor at a magazine that she should publish my writing, and so she did. And I had sent things to that magazine before and never heard from them, and never would have heard from them, and I might have gone on, I don't know what would have happened. It's like impossible to imagine what would have happened if someone hadn't done that for me. So it's like, when people talk about wanting to achieve success in writing, I don't know that anybody's set of experiences is ever helpful, because everybody has a different story. There's no 2 ways that it occurs, So I feel like a tremendous amount of guilt on one hand, because I went to school with all these great writers, and they just didn't meet someone. Like I took this guy hunting. He never killed a deer, and he wanted to kill a deer. So we flew to the Missouri Breaks, and he killed his first deer. And at the end of the trip, he was kind of like, what are your plans in life? And I said, I don't know what I'll do. I guess I had been a welder before grad school, and I was saying, well, I guess I'll go back to welding or something. I don't know. And he was like, well, I'll call someone. And you did, and it does make me feel bad. But at the same time, maybe if what I had written hadn't been good, then he wouldn't have done it, and they wouldn't have published it. It wasn't like they decided to publish a bad article, So I started doing magazine stories, and the way that writers get found, it seems like so many writers now that are young come out of graduate school programs. It used to be that writers all came out of World War II, and now they all come out of grad school. And it's like, a lot of people, now that I know literary agents, and they're really the gatekeepers to all success. Literary agents scour magazines. They scour everything. And they're always just looking for someone who did something, or someone who said something, or someone who had a set of experiences that might be interesting. And then they type your name into Google and see if you wrote a book or not. And I think that they wake up every day and do this for hours every morning. And I wrote many magazine articles, and I guess none of them were like really caught anybody's eye. But then I wrote I wrote a magazine article about the book that Dee had given me, about trying to find things from Escoffier's cookbook. And I had several agents call me up and being like, you should write a book about this. And I went on to do that, and I had kind of, like Cindy's story about coming into publishing is it seems like really calculated, and you make these decisions, and you make these career moves, and you make gambles. But I think on the writer end of it, it's just things really happen to you, and you don't have a real say. All you can do is you can just sit down and try to write things that you think are good, and everything else just just happens to you. I didn't like set out to be that I would be with this great publisher who I'm now becoming friends with. It's just like because my agent called up. I didn't know I don't even know what he's doing with my proposals, you know. In my first book, I sold it to a guy named Jonathan Burnham, who was the head of Miramax Books at the time. He now is at, isn't he?
HarperCollins.
Yeah, he's like HarperCollins
Publisher
guy.
of HarperCollins.
So he bought my book and paid me too much money for it, you know. And I met with him over lunch, and we talked about what I was going to do. I hadn't written it yet. We talked about how I was going to go about it, and then he promptly quit and went to another company. And then there was this mass exodus of everybody who had been associated with purchasing my book was gone. And they hired a whole new people. And I always thought it was like, when your friend buys a house and you go to his house and you laugh about the carpet, you're like, who would have ever bought this carpet? Like, I can't believe someone chose this carpet, you know, and I felt like, it's like, so all of a sudden these people inherited my book, you know, and it was a very kind of like bloody story, and it was edited by a avid anti-hunter whose dad had been a big hunter, and she hates her dad, you know. And the handful of times, I talked to her on the phone probably 2 times, both times she told me this story about hating her dad. And their dad smoked cigars and hunted, and she hated him. And, you know, and she just like spell checked my book. And didn't prevent me from making mistakes. Just small things now that are irksome, but it's like she didn't trust. I think that some people maybe she was I don't mean intimidated like in a way, not intimidated in the way that she thought I was smart, but I think she kind of felt like, why would I know what this person should write about? Like, why would I know what they should do, and why would I know what small changes they make? I hate hunters, you know? So she just didn't have the balls it takes to tell someone to do something differently. And it was I met my wife through this process because she came in and worked there. But all in all, it was not like a pleasurable experience for me at all. I did not like it. I felt just set adrift, you know. And that leads me to being that, again, I turned around and I wrote, and you know, Woody Allen has this line where he said, like, I always just try to make my movies just good enough to let me make another movie. And he's been really good at that, and they keep letting him make movies. And so my goal for my first book wound up being that maybe I'll write a second book. And again, the elements of chance came into play, and my agent knew about this new place that was acquiring writers, and it was Spiegel and Grau. And one day I was in the airport, and he called me on the phone and said, you know, I sold your book to these great new people. And he just quickly named the writers that they dealt with, and all of a sudden I had this great sense of calm come over me that they were working with, you know, phenomenal writers I really respected, and that were doing cool things, and that were bigger than one book. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's not people who, there's like, in my mind, everybody has these different degrees of books, but in my mind, there's like a book where something crazy happens to you or something, and then you get to write a book, but you're just like a mouthpiece for this set of events that occurred. And there's books where you can apply a sensibility or a personality or a style to many subjects. And then I realized that these people are interested in, and they think of it sort of as writers, not as books. Like, they don't publish books, but they publish writers or publish authors. And it's been true. And I turned in a manuscript that, if my original editor had gotten it, I would have a book that people would all read it and they would say, why is it so long? It's structured stupidly. And Cindy said, you know, you have to whack out 100 pages and change this around, and this isn't interesting. And it was really rewarding to go through that and wind up with something that's kind of like polished and that you sort of think of as being two people's work. Now, this hasn't come out yet, so who knows if people are going to agree with it. But it was fun. And then I wrote that, and when you write a book, there's the worst thing in a contract. The first time I read a book contract, I had one dispute. I said, this all looks fine, but I don't want to have a option, you know? And they go, well, that's in every contract. You have to have an option. And it made no sense to me. And it's just that if you write a book and it does well, that just means they get your next book if they pay the highest amount of money. Like, you can't leave them behind. And they get 90 days. So your book can come out, and then they get 90 days to find out if people like you or not. And then when that 90 days is up, then they can make their decision. But I wrote my first book, and we were still editing my book. And I asked Cindy, I said, if we go to lunch, can I just tell you ideas, and you tell me which catches your imagination? And then when it's time for us to do the official, process, I'll know what you like. And so we're talking over lunch. And I told her one idea, and she thought that was a horrible idea. I told her the second idea, and she's like, "Oh, that's a good idea. Go ahead and do that. And don't worry about writing a proposal. Just do it." And I walked out and I called an agent. I said, "I'm not sure, but I think I might have just sold a book to the publishers." And so now I get to do another one, and it feels very good to have sort of a long-term support that goes beyond like the success and fail of each book.
Yeah, that's a recurring issue and concern is I think writers really want to know that someone is invested in their career and not just the latest product. And there are people switch houses a lot. Writers, I've had 3 houses in 4 books, and that is one concern that keeps coming up. And if you find someone, be it an agent or an editor, who you are convinced believes in your work and believes in actually maybe the bad book somewhere in there, or the book that doesn't do too well, that's a huge find. I'd like to open it up really to the audience. I know you guys have questions, and so you should just feel free to ask either Steve or Cindy anything that you want to. Any questions? Yeah.
First, I'd like to say I really enjoy your books.
Thank you.
And Cindy, I was wondering, I'd like to hear what you think, and also if you could generalize, from others of your kind, what they might say is, when you get a book, that relationship between liking it or loving it yourself, and then the decision that it can sell, what's that bridge?
Right. Well, there are a lot of good books that I see that I turn down. Like, I turn down almost everything because we're small. We need books, so we're always looking, and we need new writers because that's our identity. That's who we are. We're looking for writers at the beginning of their career that we can build to the end of their career, and because it's more fun for us. It's more fun for us not to take someone who's already successful, though, sometimes that's great to do, but there you don't feel as invested in their whole career in the process as you do when you find someone at the beginning. And so I turn down almost everything that I think I can turn down. Like, if I feel I can let go of it, I do. And sometimes if I feel that there's nothing in particular that I can do with the book, like someone else could publish it just as well, and it's good, I'm happy to let someone else do it. But sometimes you get something and you think that you get it. Like, there's something about it that does move you or change you or shift the way you look at the world, and that's different from everything else, and you feel it has a kind of authentic voice to it. And when I see that, I know it. And it doesn't have to be perfect at all. Like, it doesn't have to be great. My job is just to discover talent. That's all it is. I think I'm good at it. But everybody has a different kind of talent. Everything, you're not looking for the same thing. And, with the Kite Runner, the whole the last third of the book was different. He had married an American wife, and it was terrible. It really wasn't good. And I just said, I want to talk to him on the phone, and we spoke, and he said, I'm happy to do whatever you think, because it's my first book. And I could see how talented he was for the first 2/3 of the book, and I just thought, that's fine with me, we can do this. And so that's it, it's just something that something has, that's how I do it. Now, other publishers are different. Some publishers are publishing into categories, for example, and they're looking for a certain kind of book. So if you write a women's novel, kind of women's fiction, and you go to a house that is really good at that, they know how to publish that, and you fit into their program. So if you're good enough, they'd want to take you on because they know what they're doing with that kind of book. I don't know how to do that. And when people come to me, I often say, I published a business book called A Whole New Mind, which is now selling very well. But at the time, I didn't really know what it was. I didn't know it was a business book. It came as a proposal. And I thought it was really this interesting way of looking at the world. It's about creativity in business. And I said to the author, you can go to a business publisher and they know how to publish a business book. I don't know how to do it. I've never done it before. But there's something about this that I like. And if you come here, I need you to do the business part of it. And I will do something different than what the business publishers do. And it'll just be a different kind of publication. And if that's what you want, you should come to me. But if you want to publish a business book, you should go to someone else who publishes business books. And he came and we did it. And it's really fun for me because I get to do different kinds of things. But there are different ways of publishing. And so that's why agents are great, because they know what you have and they know how to fit you with the right kind of publisher. It's not that there's a best publisher for everything. It's that you have to find the right publisher for your book.
Yeah.
Another question for Cindy. I guess I'm clueless to how this system works really, but do publishers get a stable, so to speak, of agents that they that they respect for their advice and recommendations?
Well, it's all personal relationships. So there are people that I really like, agents that I think have great taste and who like me, and they think I'm right for, we share a sensibility and a taste. So when they send me things, I'm going to read it faster than I am going to read something else that comes along. And they're going to kind of want their writers to be with me, so they kind of help me out. They can do that. They kind of push people towards you, or it doesn't mean, sometimes they'll send you something exclusively. But you really you have to look at everything, because you never know where something's coming from. So I'm publishing a book next July that came to me. This agent called me. I'd never done anything with her. I knew her name vaguely. She said, I know we've never really met. She does mostly how-to, self-help books. She said, this young agent, an assistant in my office, found this novel in the slush pile. It's brilliant. I'm jealous. I wish I was representing it. She's going to call you, but you've never heard of her. She's never sold a book before, but I think you should take her call. And I'm doing that book too, and it's a brilliant book. I've sold it all over the world. We've gotten over $500,000. All the publishers of Kite Runner are doing it. We're all doing it together. And so you never know where something's coming from. You can find things, friends of writers. It doesn't matter. It's just that we're busy. So it's helpful to know the certain agents that you trust, because you don't have time. It might take a really long time to get to the other people. Did that answer your question? Okay.
How has the book business changed in the last year or two? And do you have to adjust your strategies to adjust for economic and cultural conditions, growth of the internet, publicity and all that?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. I mean, the weird thing for me is that I left 3 years ago and haven't published in a long time. And now because it takes a long time to acquire books, it takes a long time for a book to get made, and for the writers to write their books, then you have to edit them, and then they have to be produced. So in these 2 or 3 years, it's like I went to sleep and woke up and the world has changed. And it's really difficult right now. Booksellers are going out of business. All book business is down. I'm seeing numbers of books sell that I've never seen before. I've never sold 4,000 copies of a book, like rarely, and now a book that would have sold 18,000, you get the same thing. You get all the publicity, you get everything you wanted, and you look on Bookscan and you see that it sold like 4,500 copies, and it's really depressing. I don't know. We do whatever we can. It's really, nobody knows how to sell a book, and I think that the easiest books to sell are books where there's an audience and you know how to get to that audience. So for Steve's book, for example, there's a kind of natural constituency of people who like natural history, or hunters, or like the West. There's who you're selling to, and then it could be bigger than that. But at least you know where to look. Like that readers of Outside Magazine, for example, are going to like Steve's book. And that's harder to do if you have some novel that you think, oh, everybody will like this book. Well, how do you find everybody? What do you say that will appeal to everybody? And I think part of our job, and part of why I think we've been successful, is that since we do books that are really different from each other, it's the difference that you can sell, so you know how to talk about the book. I think most publishers don't know how to talk about their books, because you have to find the one thing that's interesting that you need that people might want to hear about, and publish that. It's a challenge, and if you have any ideas, I think it's all word of mouth is still the main way that you sell books, and through book clubs. And the one thing I think we're noticing is that people are generally reading less, I think, but people are still reading, but they're reading the same books. It seems like some books are huge, like Water for Elephants, The Kite Runner, certain books everybody's reading, and you run into people and they've all read those 5 books, and nobody's reading all the other books. And so if you can get one of those books, you're in great shape, and then that could support your other publishing. But it didn't used to be like that. It used to be that there was a certain core audience for lots of books, and then there were always some books that sold better. But now it feels like you have to hit one of those major ones that becomes the book club. Because there are book clubs, everybody in book clubs they all read the same books. So if you can get into that circuit, kind of, you grow. But if you don't make it in, it's really hard.
Yeah.
My question was for Cindy as well, and as a publisher, when you're reviewing manuscript, do you direct your attention to one manuscript at a time and finish it completely before moving on to another one, or do you allow yourself time to absorb and move on between different ones? I was just wondering how that working through that part.
Are you talking about acquiring or editing?
Acquiring.
Yeah, I don't really read very many of them. I mean, you read the first few pages and you get rid of them. I mean, I get so many things, I can't possibly read them all. And editing takes a really long time. So when I edit, I can't edit 2 things at one time. I can barely read something else when I'm editing, which is really hard because I'm always editing something. But, you sort of enter a world and you want to stay there till you're done. When I read submissions, nonfiction, they're short, they're just proposals, so that's good. So you can quickly know if you are interested or not. But usually you can tell 5 pages, you read the writing, and it's usually not good. I usually have my assistant reads most of them. And sometimes I know, like if a great agent that I have a relationship with calls me and says, I'm sending you this thing, it's amazing, I'll read it. It'll come to me, I'll know it, I'll read it. Otherwise, I give them to my assistant. She gets rid of most of them. She writes these letters in my name. Like many people think, I don't write most of those letters because I just can't do it. And I read them. I make sure they sound like me a little enough. She's getting good at writing in my voice, and I send them off. And then, the ones that either catch my eye or that she gives me, she says you should look at this. Then I'll read those. And then I read the ones from my editors also who want to acquire things. They give them to me or Julie, and we read theirs and decide if we want to publish the books. So, yeah, most of it, that's why your first, 20 pages should be really, really good. You have to catch someone's eye from the beginning, and you don't have time. Even if it's a novel, and you say, oh, the first 100 pages aren't that good, or the first 30 pages, but then it gets really, really good, and you have to read to the end. No one's going to get there. So that's the problem.
So there is a difference, a sort of fundamental difference between a nonfiction submission and a fiction submission. The idea, the proposal in a nonfiction submission is the idea for the book, and then you want some evidence as well that the person can write and get the idea down the road. What are you looking for in fiction?
In fiction,
what is really good?
Well, in fiction, nonfiction. Let me just go back to nonfiction. Nonfiction. If it's a great idea, I don't even really care about the writing because I can rewrite it. I can. I mean, if they're willing, we can just go in there and fix it all. But if there's something really interesting to say, it doesn't matter. Right? You just want information. You want to convey information. If it's fiction, they need to be able to write. I mean, that's the main thing. And so, it's really the voice. And there are a lot of good stories out there. And most of them, and sometimes I do finish a novel. Like if I finish a novel and then don't bid on it, it's really good, and I didn't love it quite enough, but it took a lot of my time up. I'll try to stop this if I can, and sometimes you just end up reading the whole thing because you get sucked in and you really like it. And then I turn it down anyway because I have no idea how to publish it. Like it's just a nice story, and people will like it, but no, I know that very few people will ever pick it up to read it, because it's not doing, I could live without it. You know, and I think there are a lot of books out there. I mean, there are a lot of books out there, and I, hear about a lot of books. I haven't read, there's no time to read all the books that you even really want to read. And so, unless it's something that I really feel that has changed me in some way, that, so that's what I'm looking for, something that feels really different, that takes you somewhere new, that opens the world for you. That, I mean, I keep saying that, but it sounds so lofty or something, but there are books that really, that you enter into and that change the way that help you as a person, that do something to you and make you a kind of bigger person. And that's what fiction does best. It takes you to places where you can't go yourself. And if a book can do that, that's what, to me, is...
You have to be entranced.
Right? And then I think if I feel that way, someone else will feel that way. And that's the whole thing for me for selling. It's not that I think, oh, there's a market for people who really like football games. It's like something, that there's a market for something specific. I don't know what there's a market for, but if I really love it and feel that it's affected me kind of profoundly, then I think it'll do that to someone else, and then they'll talk about it to their friends, and that's what I think makes a selling book.
Okay. Questions? Yeah, Corby?
So for Cindy and both of you, is there a book that you really wish that you would have published? I mean, something that was remarkable in terms of fiction, and I'm wondering, Dee and Steve, have you read something that you think, I wish I would have done that book? I mean, I'm always looking for what's really exciting to writers.
Yeah, there are a few books that I wish I had published, but there aren't that many, because sometimes, because there's so many books, and I think other people did a good job publishing those books, and I didn't need to do them. I really like the books that I have, and so, but I do, I really want to publish Michael Chabon's last book, and we met, and I really liked him, and it was a whole complicated thing, and he ended up going to HarperCollins instead, and I just feel kind of sad that I didn't publish it. We've done it twice already, that he's come and we've talked, and then he hasn't come to me, and so...
That little travel book?
No, the Alaska book, yeah.
The Yiddish.
The Yiddish Policemen's Union, yeah. But also the Mysteries of, not the one before that, Cavalier and Clay, they came to me, he was already under contract, and they wanted to move him, and I didn't think it was kind of ethical, and then we met again, but there are a few people like that I think are really interesting writers, and that I have something. Oh, I know also, because I want to publish someone when I think I can help them, and I thought that I could help him. I mean, not that he needs help. I don't want to be so presumptuous to say that he needs help, but I felt that I understood his sensibility in a way that, for example, his stories that he's interested in writing, I felt that I could, that I understood something that he was doing, that I felt I could kind of be part of the process. And that's why I think I'm interested in him. That's what interests me in writers. If there's something that I feel, most writers, if they're fine and they don't need me, I don't feel bad about it. But if there's something that I see in them that I want to convey, or be part of, that's when I kind of wish I had published them.
Mm-hmm. What do you wish you would have written?
I wish I wrote the Bible and the Iraq War plan, because I would have changed parts of the Bible around. And no, the books that really grabbed me and made me want to write, but there's just like a very small handful of them. Was Michael Harris' Dispatches about the Vietnam War. I read that, and that made me feel like being a writer. And then Coming Into the Country by John McPhee made me feel like being a writer. And then Ian Fraser's Great Plains. I think of those three books. When I got out of college, I had never really read books. I read all books about mountain men, and I read 3 Tom Robbins novels, and mostly like books like Trapping Fur Bears of North America. I'd read stuff like that. And then I remember getting into grad school, and I turned around, I thought I should read something, and so I went to the library and got Dubliners and read that. And then I felt like I was prepared. I really hadn't read any serious book. I hadn't read books that by writers that are known about. I read Cannery Row by John Steinbeck in high school. But yeah, and then when I got to grad school, they just every grad student reads the same books. It might change, but like everybody has to read Raymond Carver, and then you try to write like Raymond Carver, and then everybody reads Rock Springs by Richard Ford and tries to write stories like that, and then grad students all read those guys, and they all make up how much they drank and how much they had sex, and all grad students write, and they want to show the other grad students how that they had crazy jobs, or that they had a crazy family, or that they drank and had sex. And then eventually some writers get over that. And I think it's like, no, but I think if you come in and you read, there's this canon, like the grad school canon is these like people who write about having crazy jobs and doing drugs, you know? And then I think that you got to read other stuff beyond that. And so I started reading some books that went beyond the grad school canon and were just like great books about things, you know. I think coming into the country all the time, it's just like an idea of a state join. It's like a book about what happens when a state joins the union, you know, and it happens to be a peculiar state because it's Alaska. And it's just, I don't know, it just really affected me in a way that you could make a book out of something that went beyond social relationships and self-celebration, you know, or celebrating one's own vices. And those are some books that I think are just phenomenal books, you know.
Ian Fraser wrote a wonderful introduction to Best American Essays one year. What year was it? Maybe 98. But in which he said an essay is a person talking. And was that right? Mm-hmm. And in the case of Steve and several other students I've had, part of the process seems to be coming to trust that the way that you talk and the way that you think about things can be literary. That your curiosities and your voice together can be wonderfully compelling on the page. And I think a lot of students sometimes forget that. They think if you're going to write an essay, all of a sudden you see this very elevated essay language, and it's very formal, doesn't sound like them.
D beat that out of you.
That's what I had to beat out of him. And it's really thrilling when you see somebody then come to the point where they trust their own voice. Whether it's nonfiction or fiction, there are obviously an array of voices that can be employed in both, actually. But to answer your question, Corby, I just recently reread Donna Tartt's A Secret History, and I hadn't read it for ages, and I didn't like it as well the second time as the first time, but I still admired it and felt absorbed in it, and I tried to think why I did. And one reason is that she writes a book about every 10 years, and you can tell. I mean, it's all the sentence crafting, the sense of really inhabiting a complicated and layered world is there, and I realized that I got a lot of pleasure out of it again because too many books feel too thin to me, that they're written too fast, and you aren't really invited at the sentence level even to just sink into them. So that was a recent pleasure. I actually like her other book, The Little Friend, better, but she's an oddball. Yeah. Bill?
In the sense of finding and shaping writers and working with fiction writers in their careers, and all three of you may be too young to really answer this, is there anyone today who we looked at as like Max Perkins, years from now, look back at as Max Perkins, or was his time so different, and the state and health of the novel so different?
This was an editor who got these massive manuscripts from writers like Thomas Wolfe and basically carved books out of them. And he's asking if there's somebody like that out there now.
Yeah, I would just like to say that I got this massive book from Steve. Now it's really good.
There you go.
I mean, there are still editors who are, there are a few really great editors around, and there are a lot of editors who don't really edit, so.
Yeah, there seems to be a range. You know, some editors won't publish a book that they don't consider to be completely done, basically, and then it's just getting it out there. And then every degree from there to carving massive amounts out of Steve's book to shape it. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about finding the balance between trusting the editor to carve out the right book versus at the same time hanging on to something that there may be conflict about whether or not it should stay or not? So entities or pieces of your writing, you know, when you hang in there as a writer for yourself, knowing that you think it's the best thing or the best part of it, versus just
How bloody were your battles?
Yeah, I'll address that from my perspective. Is that for me, doing magazine work was really invaluable because it teaches you a level of humility. And a lot of times, you know, you get a contract to write a magazine article and you write it, and if you don't do what they tell you, they're just not going to publish it. They don't need to publish it. It's like, who don't want to write magazine articles? Do you know what I mean? You have to realize that you're lucky to be doing it, and you're lucky to be getting the money. And a lot of times when you feel like an editor at a magazine is pulling you in a direction you don't want to go and that you're embarrassed by, it's not because that editor has bad taste. It might just be because you fucked up the article and it's like not good. Do you know what I mean? So all the times when I wrote things that failed and I wound up writing things I was embarrassed about because at the end I had to do something that was embarrassing or cheesy, or I had to make it like more zany, you know, and I like the one-eyed pirate and we're getting drunk on rum. It's like for a travel story, you know, where you had to like meet a zany guy, then you're supposed to meet another zany guy and have a zany travel article. It's because you didn't do a good job. It's not good. And the only thing they can do in the end is they're like, we're gonna have to salvage your article and make it a zany article because you failed at making your subject interesting. Do you know what I mean? And it's like you learn a level of humility. Now I can do articles and I know what they need because they're running a business, and it's like at magazines and in books, it's a hard business and it's like tough, and you got to sell ads, and people have to be excited by it, and you're producing products. You know, if you go, let's say you hire a guy to build you a house, and you go to this great architect, and he draws up this house, and it's cool, and in the end you go like, oh, you know what though, I want you to take windows out of the bedroom because I can't sleep in light. It has to be extremely dark. The architect would never be like, oh, never mind then. You know, it's just how I wanted it to be. Do you know what I mean? You have to be willing to compromise a little bit, or else they'll shut you out. It's like they're looking for reasons not to work with you. I mean, you have to be just really easy to work with.
The other thing is that you have to, that's why it's important for you to know, to have, when you know, if someone should say, I want to publish your book, you should know what their feelings about your book are before you get into a contract. I mean, if I love a book and I know, I get it, I don't need to talk to the author, I just sign it up. But there are times when you see something and you know that you like parts of it, but you don't, there are things that you have a problem with. Like with The Kite Runner, I needed to talk to him because I didn't want to have him sign a contract and then I say, oh, by the way, I hate the last third of the book, so could you just rewrite it for me? I had to know that we were together on that he could let go of it. And then if he didn't agree, I wouldn't have done the book, but maybe somebody else would have. He could have gone on to someone else. If you have to talk through, you know, if you feel very strongly about things, you want to make sure that someone gets what you're doing. And it doesn't mean that they have to get every scene, but they have to think it's the same book. Like what I feel often is that writers, like my job is to get writers to see what their book really is. Sometimes I think writers don't know what they've written. They write something and the things that are a problem are because they thought they were writing some other kind of book. And if you can make them see what the book is, then, and it help them make it become that thing fully, then you're successful. And I think, you know, some editors aren't great or aren't good and might not share your vision. then you have to make a decision. Do you want to get your book published? And if you do, and they're the only ones who want your book, then you should do what they tell you to do, but you know what you're getting into. Or you can not do it if you'd rather not have your book published. But I think it's important that you know what the expectations are when you go into it.
There's an attitude I think that a lot of writers have. Not so much the ones I know in New York, but the ones I know other places would be like these like kind of broad generalizations about editors are so scared now. Like, you know, editors, they don't get it. They only want to know what they only want to have books that the stuff they know about. They only want to read books that are about themselves, you know. I just don't. There's that again is like this kind of weird level of arrogance that you can fall into where it's like where you don't feel that it's a collaborative process, or you don't feel like you might, you know, heaven forbid, learn something from somebody, or, you know, take someone's suggestions. But then there's all that, you know, people love the stories where you stick it to the man, you know. We're like, he wouldn't change it, and 50 publishers turned him down, and, you know, and he publishes anyway, and it's a bestseller. It's like everybody who loves their grandpa who smokes and eats bacon and lives till 90, you know what I mean? It's like, you know what I mean? It's just people love those kind of stories, but I just think they're misleading.
Well,
Go ahead. No, usually when I find, you know, tell somebody something about what I think, there's something that's not working. Now, it might be that it's not just that scene isn't working. There might be another way for you to address it and keep your scene, but there's something wrong with it. You know, there's something not working. If you can find another way to address it, and then it comes back to me and it works, and I have a really bad memory. That's one of the things that helps me as an editor, is that I can't remember what it was last time, but when I read it again, if it works, then I'm not going to make you pull out that scene. You found a way to address it. But what I tell writers is that if there's, you know, you might not agree with me precisely about what it is I'm thinking you should do, but what I'm really saying is that area, that isn't working. And you have to figure out, you know, if I'm wrong and you feel strongly about it, figure out another way to do it. But it's, you know, and I think that you have to listen when people say it's not working. Like, a lot of writers go to a million friends of theirs, you know, they listen to what you say, and then they go ask all their friends to read it, and all their friends say different things. And it's very confusing. You know, I think you have to find someone that you trust. I mean, if it's not your editor, it's too bad. Like, it's too bad that you found someone that you didn't relate to. But I think a good editor will just point out the problem spots. It's not that they're telling you what to do specifically. It's that it's your book, and you have to figure out how to address it. But you should listen at those moments when something seems to be going wrong.
yeah.
You know, I'm sitting here listening to you talk about your imprint and the way you work, and I'm thinking, gee, it'd be a really good fit with my book. But Celina, how do I get into that process? How do I find agents who would be on your wavelength, or, you know, or whatever? How do I learn these things?
Right, there are a million agents. That's the problem. Like, millions of them. I don't even know all of them because they keep popping up. And their job is to know me. It's not my job to know them, but you sort of have to know them. And one way of doing it is, I mean, you're here, so this is great because there are writers everywhere here. It seems like everywhere I turn, there are writers. You can look, but agents are really hungry. Like, part of their problem is that there are too many of them. So they all really they need to keep finding people and making money, and they need to get things away from all these other agents. And so they're really looking, you know, they're reading stuff. And one way is to look in the acknowledgments of books that you like, and then, you know, you'd want to find a really nice acknowledgement, like someone who liked their agent and a kind of sensibility that you'd share, and then just write a letter to the agent. That's their job, is to read your stuff. You don't need an introduction to them. But if you know someone who has an agent, that works too.
I have a lot of friends who just started out just writing stuff. Like, you write stuff for a literary journal, and then you can put that on a letter that you send to another literary journal, and they think, oh, I know that literary journal. I'll look at this thing. I got, like, early on, one of the first story I ever published was in Trapper and Predator Caller, but then the second article I published is an outside. So the second article I published is an outside, and all of a sudden I could publish. It's like it just gives you like a stamp of approval, and then you just kind of go along. And I don't think you should watch. This is just based on like my friends' experience, like people roughly, you know, in their 20s and 30s who went to school a lot is kind of who I know, and they all have the same. Like one thing that's similar in their stories is they just started publishing things, and then eventually someone came and found them, and it winds up being a better fit because they looked at it. Their agents looked at it, and it resonated with them in some way, or they had like at least some kind of vision. And it just, I think that just to take things a small step at a time, and trust that if you do good work, and if it's the main thing you do, and you try hard, there's a small chance that it'll all fall in place. You know, I think that's, I don't know, just based on my own experiences and friends' experience, it seems like that's the one thing I could really say about people who turn out to be surprised, and they're always surprised that they wrote a book or that someone published a book of theirs, you know.
Sometimes I think for grad students, you've got 2 years in an MFA program, and a difficult decision is whether to try to work on short pieces that might have a shot at getting published and therefore get you your book contract at some point, or whether this kind of rare 2 years, you should try your big piece, or work on a novel if that's what you feel you want to do, or a long book of nonfiction. Does it make a difference to you, Cindy, if somebody has been published well before?
Yes,
In a
yes.
Plowshares, a story in Plowshares.
Oh, no, it really
Yeah,
doesn't make a
okay.
difference at all. I don't care. You know, I just read what I see. The thing that it does help with is when you're publishing it. It doesn't make a difference in my decision to publish something. But when I'm publishing it, I have to present my books to a sales force that has a million other books to publish. I mean, my sales force is Random House a sales force, so they sell Knopf, Crown, you know, Ballantine, Bantam, all these other houses, and they can't read everything. So all those other things, like if you've won awards, or you know, if you publish in the New Yorker, that really helps. I have to sell you to my people in-house, and that's where blurbs come in. It's funny because people are always writing these pieces about blurbs, whether they're good or bad or important or not. What blurbs are most important for me are not to convince readers out there that they should read the book. They're to convince my own sales force that this book is worth their time, that all these other writers have found this book of interest, because they're probably not going to read it, or maybe that will make them read the book. You know, I want my salespeople to read the books, and so you're doing like the first part of the publication process is just selling the books in-house. And that's really the hardest part, because that's what's going to get your number at Barnes & Noble, or you know, your number at the independent bookstores. Without them, your book is invisible out there. And then the second part is getting publicity and all of that. But yeah, so everything that you do is helpful. It doesn't mean that it has nothing to do with my decision to publish a book, but it has a lot to do with the way I publish a book.
Thank you.
Like your connections, if you studied and you have teachers who will blurb you, that's good. You know?
Are we about out of time?
I'm really sorry, because I know we could go on all afternoon, and we've got to make room for the next group, and
Okay.
Steve has to go sign his autograph to the books that you're going to buy. His
All
first
right.
book, so.
Thank you all.
Thank